Hello and welcome to one of my pre-PTR heroic Icecrown Citadel boss guides, where I've gone through and looked over old YouTube VODs, online forums, and Wowhead pages to try and produce a modern, up-to-date boss guide with as much relevant information as possible. I'll try to present each encounter in the most straightforward way that is applicable to everyone, then leave the discussion of boss mechanics, assignments, and logic for later in the video. Now before we get started, if you'd like to see more WoW content or want to help my channel grow, consider dropping a like, subscribing, and sharing this video with a friend. It really helps me out, and I appreciate the support. Otherwise, thanks for watching and enjoy the video. The Gunship Battle is a single phase encounter. Your raid will need 2 tanks. This fight is relatively straightforward, so instead of giving a quick summary, we're just going to run through it. The goal of this fight is to destroy the other faction's ship before the opposing NPC faction can destroy yours. Siege damage is dealt to the enemy ship by firing cannons. In 25-man, 4 players will be assigned to this role. Extra healers or melee DPS are good candidates because there isn't much damage going out during the fight, and melee players will have significantly less uptime than ranged players. The cannons have 2 abilities, one builder that generates heat, and one spender that expels heat. Slam both buttons on cooldown for maximum boat damage. Note that cannons will overheat upon reaching 100 heat, rendering them unusable for several seconds. But as long as players are using both abilities on cooldown, this won't be an issue. Players manning the cannons should be sure to aim at the enemy ranged attackers, as their cannon shots deal damage to both the ship and the enemy mobs. Split the raid into 2 teams. The defensive team will remain on the player's gunship, and the offensive team will move back and forth between both gunships. The offensive team will include players piloting the cannons. Assign 1 tank, half of your DPS, and at least 1 healer to the offensive team. Be sure to include all remaining melee DPS on this team. This group will acquire jetpacks from the engineer NPC and will board the enemy faction's ship every 45 seconds or so when a new battle mage or a sorcerer spawns. This ad will freeze your ship's cannons until killed, so the offensive team is responsible for killing this ad. Make sure your tank is the first person to jump over to the enemy's ship, because they will need to keep threat on the opposing faction leader while DPS work on the caster. The tank will be the only person taking meaningful damage during this time. If you choose to assign fewer healers to the offensive team, have your tank bring the faction leader to the side of the ship such that they're within range of your healers on the defensive team. Once the caster ad is killed, the offensive team will return to the friendly ship to pilot the cannons once more. It's important that everyone returns, because the opposing faction leader gains a stacking damage buff that only resets when no players are left on the enemy ship. The offensive team repeats this for every new mage spawn until the encounter ends. Meanwhile, the defensive team, which consists of 1 tank, the rest of your ranged DPS, and your remaining healers, will be responsible for the following. Ranged DPS will focus the enemy riflemen or axe throwers on the opposing gunship and AoE the enemy boarding party when they spawn on their gunship. These ads will continually respawn over the course of the encounter. The defensive team's tank will be responsible for tanking the enemy boarding party when they spawn. These ads will spawn out of a portal and consist of 2 types of mobs. Both of these ads may buff themselves, increasing armor by 120% and attack speed by 60%. The Sergeant will also apply a Mortal Strike effect and use Bladestorm. Enemy boarders who don't have players on their aggro list instead attack the player's gunship with Burning Pitch. This ability deals massive damage to your ship and should be stopped at all costs. To avoid this, simply have the defensive team tank immediately engage with the enemy boarding party. For DPS on the defensive team, it's good practice to prioritize damage on the ranged ads before the enemy boarding party. This way the offensive team, aka your melee DPS, have something to do during their downtime back on the friendly ship. That said, all ads excluding the enemy commander will gain ranks. These ranks increase their damage, cast speed, and attack speed. The longer an ad is left alive, the more ranks they will gain. So while the defensive team DPS should prioritize the enemy ranged ads, you will eventually need to kill the enemy boarding party, otherwise your tank may get dunked on. For healers, their primary focus will be on keeping tanks alive. Raid damage this fight is very low, and is almost entirely comprised of the ranged ads dealing damage to random players. The only other source of damage going out during this fight will be when the opposing gunship launches rockets at your gunship. A flashing rune will appear on the ground where the rocket is soon to land. This ability can and should be avoided, but if hit, players will take moderate damage and be knocked back. And that's it. This is one of the easiest encounters in the instance, just make sure your raid stays on top of managing the ads and the ship battle should go in your favor. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more ICC guides coming soon. See ya.